Welcome to Kerusi Panas Episode 6. This is the series that looks at hot seats in the 6 states that are holding elections come this August. I've gotten in my car and driven about an hour and a half south to the beautiful state of Penang. I'm on the mainland, Seberang Perai. It's a place that has gone through rapid transformation, largely semi-urban, but increasingly becoming more urbanized. The seat I've chosen, however, still retains that semi-rural character. It has that sense of small town. You drive through lanes, very narrow lanes, to come to old traditional Malay houses right next to more modern concrete ones. There is a rubber factory, a market, local cafes, street vendors selling Malay kueh. The seat I'm speaking about is the seat of Penanti, right in the heart of the parliamentary constituency of Penang. No one in Malaysia will not have heard of Penang. This has been the seat that has been associated with Malaysia's Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim for decades. He first won this seat back in 1982 when he entered politics from the perspective of joining, at that time, UMNO. Previously, he had been active as a student leader. Since 1982, the Anwar family held this seat in some capacity. Even when Anwar was arrested, it was held by his wife, and then subsequently, it was recently held by his daughter. That was until last November, Tuci 15. Many were shocked at the loss of Penang. I was not. The statistics clearly showed that this was a seat that was under risk. And in fact, when we look at the patterns of voting, Penang was expected to lose. It had nothing to do with the candidate. It had to do with the social transformations that are taking place. And in this seat of Penanti, we see the same sets of issues at place. The role of the candidate and the power of legacy versus the transformations that are taking place in terms of rising Islamization, rising changes in terms of outlooks, and the increasing power and the capacity of the opposition to build on that power on the part of Pakatan Nasional, especially PAS. If there's any seat that is really the test of the green wave, Penanti would be it. It's also the seat that is the test of Anwar Ibrahim's popularity and pull. He's the second prime minister from Penang, the first being Abdullah Badawi. When you come into Penanti, you see posters of Anwar. It's clear he's marked this presence. You also see a poster of Nurul Izzah, his daughter, who lost the constituency back in November. It's a common practice in Malaysia to use the figure of the prime minister as a pull factor. And I think one of the issues in this campaign is whether or not that is an effective strategy from the perspective of these state elections. It's risen the bar from the perspective of making this about Anwar Ibrahim and his government. And of course, whatever happens in the election will be seen more directly as an impact on him, especially given that his posters are in many of the states. But in Penang, the Anwar Ibrahim factor is seen as something positive. It's seen as having a pull. He is, after all, a prime minister from Penang. And the fact that his poster is so prominent in Penanti is a hope to really change the voting pattern that happened in this particular state seat. Penanti is at the very core of the transformation that took place in Penang, the change in political power from PKR to Pakatan Nasional. Nurul Izzah lost the seat by 5,272 votes. But the overwhelming majority of those votes, in terms of the majority that PAS won, the PAS candidate, now the MP, a man called Muhammad Fawaz Matjan, won, was in the area of Penanti. Muhammad Fawaz Matjan was an ustaz. He was very savvy in running a TikTok campaign. He was able to mobilize especially young voters. Penanti represents a place where there has been growing Islamization in Malaysia, growing religious conservatism. A lot of that has come from the religious schools. There's been growing attention to the role of religion as defining and framing how people perceive politics, almost to the exclusion of looking at other issues. Here is this core of what has been called and labeled the Green Wave. And in this regard, Penanti represents a challenge about how the Green Wave should be addressed. And what's happened in this contest is that PKR, instead of taking the green wave on directly and trying to offer different sets of alternatives, they've adopted a different strategy. The strategy, if you can't beat them, you join them. So what's happened is that the candidate being slated by PKR is an Ustaz. The man they've slated is an Ustaz as well, Rashidi bin Hussein. He's 52 years old, and he is the CEO of the Waqaf, or the Endowment for Pulau Pinang. Interestingly, he was also the previous PAS candidate in Penang, which is another seat on the mainland. He contested there in 2013. He didn't win, but he actually has had very strong ties across political parties. He's well known as an Ustaz. He's a very youthful-looking 52. He was trained in law, very well-spoken. He has a degree from UIA, University Islam Utara, which is in Golbak. And he is a local, not technically in the sense that he was born right outside of the district of Penanti. For that district included him in the past, so he's seen as a local. He's contesting against Bersatu, a man called Zulkifli bin Bakar. I understand he's in business, but it's not so clear on public record what his professional background. But he is very well known for being involved in politics because he heads Bersatu in Penang. On Twitter, he's very popular and very confident of being able to win this seat. His TikTok name is @12 Penanti Zulkifli Bakar. A sense of confidence and realizes that the numbers very much work in his favor. It's not a coincidence that Bersatu has put their head in the seat of Penanti. It shows how hot it is. So we see a situation where PKR has adopted a very strategic move, while at the same time, Bersatu is also pushed and put one of its heavyweights in order to try to win this seat. There are lots of things going on in this seat. I've spoken earlier about the importance of legacy and popularity of Anwar. This is arguably his most important test, a most concrete test of his popularity, his pull factor. Can he win back and change 4,000 votes towards his favor? With Rashidi, of course, being the person, an Ustaz, pushing and pulling. Can he also show a strategy of engaging the green wave by offering a different form and different outlook on issues of religion? Rashidi is seen to be someone who is not as conservative as other Ustaz. Keep in mind that not all Ustaz are the same, and many of them have different views on Islam, something people continue to essentialize and not recognize the variation among them. By putting an Ustaz in the seat of Penanti, he's actually trying to show different ways of conceptualizing and understanding the faith. It's also a test of the state government. Interestingly enough, in this particular contest, the state government features in posters about how much money they spent on different programs, be it on education, be it on child care centers, be it on health, support for welfare assistance. These things are very prominent at many of the small lane cross-sections. In looking at the seat, it's grown in number. It has around 28,000 voters. It's a Malay majority seat of around 80%. They're 18% Chinese, 2% Indians. Most of the Chinese are Hokkien, which is very typical in Penang. The voting patterns in the past in GE15 are very interesting. First, we see the pivotal role of the youth vote, reinforcing the perceptions and the narrative of the green wave being real youth vote driven. We look at the youth vote and we see that Pakatan Harapan performed poorly among younger voters in Penanti. So, for example, it won only at most 31% of those voters between 21 and 25, and even less among those among Undi 18 at a mere 22%. It was Pakatan Nasional who won the overwhelming amount of support among younger voters, nearly 60%, and 62% of those of Undi 18 voters, who interestingly turned out in very high numbers of 90%. The overall share of youth vote in this seat is 29%, so you're looking at not quite a third, but a considerable amount. It's very difficult for you to win a seat like this with this many voters of young voters without being able to win the majority or at least a significant share of them. Rashidi Hussain has to focus on these particular youth voters to be able to win. Pakatan National's candidate, Zulkifli Bakar, feels confident because the Pakatan National continues to dominate the narrative in TikTok among young people, overwhelmingly so. In terms of ethnic voting, we see very interesting patterns. Among the Malay community, Pakatan National won the overall majority of 55% in this seat. PH, Pakatan Harapan, won 21%, and BN won 23%. The question will be, what happens to the BN 23%? Where will it go? PN continues to be confident, feeling that it will go to them. But in fact, surveys do show that Anwar Ibrahim has also gained support among BN voters. And in fact, this is where this test of popularity will be. Anwar has won votes among UMNO voters, particularly in places like Selangor and Penang, in terms of what the survey says. They suggest that some in UMNO would like to be on the side of the government. And this is, of course, a very important place in the area, such as Penanti. Anwar himself, his main support long ago was from UMNO. This was an UMNO seat until 1999 for multiple terms. And interestingly enough, the placement of Rashidi Hussain here, from who was formerly in PAS, is an attempt to try to pull support from PAS itself, especially building on the personal ties that Rashidi has as an ustaz and a religious teacher, hoping that his candidate factor are at play. So we have two candidate factors at play, Anwar and Rashidi. The Chinese support was a whopping 97%. And if indeed what the Penang leaders are saying, that there's a drop in Chinese support, is true, which I think really will be only tested when we see this in terms of the actual results. The fact is that this would have a very big impact on a seat like Penanti. 97% of the Chinese voted for Pakatan Harapan in this seat, a very, very large number. What is key, however, is the question of turnout for the Chinese voters in terms of impacting the seat of Penanti. These questions, the issue of outreach, the strategies that are adopted, these are fascinating things about a seat like Penanti. The semi-rural changes that are taking place of transforming the society will speak to whether or not the transformations in terms of Islamization will continue. Anwar's test in Penanti is real. Bersatu, however, feels that the wave works to their advantage. They hope that a victory in Penanti would be a slap in the face of Anwar Ibrahim, a signal, indeed, that the wave of Pakatan National is strong. Penanti voters I spoke to seem to be more open to changing back to PKR, but the campaign remains hot and intense. Penanti may have the feel of small towns, the feel of old Malaysia, but it is very much an indication of contemporary Malaysia and what could happen for Malaysia's future. Thank you for joining me in Kerusi Panas. Please continue to listen. We'll have another episode tomorrow.